The Indomitable's observation deck offered a perfect view of Xylos. Captain Kalen Vance stood with his hands clasped behind his back, watching the swirling emerald and azure atmosphere of the planet below. From orbit, it looked almost inviting, a jewel at the edge of known space. Beautiful, isn't it? The voice belonged to Sergeant Rhea, who had stepped onto the deck so quietly that Kalen hadn't noticed her approach. It is, Kalen agreed. Hard to believe the probes classified it as a Gamma-level threat. Rhea moved to stand beside him. Unlike Kalen's pristine uniform, hers bore the subtle marks of a veteran, small repairs and customizations permitted only to those who had earned them. I've learned to trust the probes, Captain, especially when they use words like Deathworld. Kalen smiled. Rhea's caution was legendary among the 7th Expeditionary Corps, but he respected her for it. The High Command briefings make it sound like a standard pacification operation. The Krellium deposits alone will fund our expansion for decades. Yes, sir, Rhea replied, her tone carefully neutral. The briefings are always optimistic. Below them, massive Athelian transport ships began their deployment patterns, moving into position for the invasion that would begin at dawn. The Empire had conquered 1,000 worlds across as many galaxies, spreading order and civilization to the stars. Xylos would be no different. Any concerns, Sergeant? Kalen asked, noting Rhea's hesitation. Rhea considered her words carefully. The preliminary reports are too clean, sir. No contradictions, no anomalies, no dissenting analyses. When was the last time you saw a unanimous assessment from Recon? Kalen frowned. It was unusual now that she mentioned it. Imperial reconnaissance typically produced reports riddled with contested observations and alternative hypotheses. Perhaps the evidence is simply overwhelming this time. Perhaps, Rhea conceded, but her expression remained troubled. Kalen turned back to the viewport. Get some rest, Sergeant. Tomorrow we bring civilization to another world. Another world, Rhea echoed. Let's hope it wants to be civilized. The deployment order came at 0500 hours. Kalen stood in the dropship bay, inspecting his unit one final time. Each soldier was encased in cutting-edge Athelian battle armor, its sleek surfaces gleaming under the harsh lights. Energy weapons hummed with power, and the air was thick with the scent of ozone and anticipation. Remember your training, Kalen told them. The Empire expects nothing less than total victory. We'll secure the primary landing zone and establish a forward operating base by nightfall. Rhea approached, her own armor bearing additional environmental sensors she had insisted on installing. Final atmospheric readings are coming in, sir. Magnetic disturbances are stronger than anticipated. Within acceptable parameters? Kalen asked. According to command, yes. The subtle emphasis on command wasn't lost on Kalen. The dropship pilots began their pre-launch sequences. Hundreds of vessels throughout the Indomitable were doing the same, preparing to deliver thousands of the Empire's finest soldiers to the surface of Xylos. Into the dropships, Kalen ordered. For the Empire, his soldiers echoed, filing into the vessels with practiced efficiency. Kalen took his place beside Rhea in the lead dropship. As the bay doors closed, sealing them in, he felt the familiar surge of pride. This was what the Athelian Empire did best, bringing order to chaos, civilization to wilderness, purpose to waste. Xylos would soon join the ranks of grateful protectorates, its resources fueling the continued expansion of humanity's greatest achievement. The drop began smoothly enough. The fleet of vessels detached from the Indomitable and its sister ships, forming perfect insertion patterns as they descended toward Xylos. Through the viewports, Kalen watched the swirling clouds grow larger, the true scale of the planet becoming apparent. The first sign of trouble came as they entered the upper atmosphere. Magnetic interference intensifying, the pilot announced, her voice tight with concentration. Navigation systems compromised. Kalen felt the dropship lurch violently. Compensate manually. Trying, sir, but a blinding flash lit up the viewport, followed by a thunderous crack. The vessel shuddered, alarms blaring throughout the cabin. We've lost contact with Dropship 7, the communications officer reported. An 8. And multiple signals going dark, sir. Rhea was studying her environmental scanner, her expression grim. These aren't just magnetic storms, Captain. There's something more structured about them, almost like what, Sergeant? Like they're responding to our presence. The dropship lurched again, more violently this time. Through the viewport, Kalen watched in horror as a nearby vessel was struck by what appeared to be a tendril of energy, its hull rupturing instantly. The screams of its occupants cut off as it tumbled toward the surface. "Brace for impact," the pilot shouted. "Controls non-responsive." Kalen gripped his harness as the vessel spun wildly, the surface of Xylos rushing up to meet them. The last thing he remembered was Rhea's face, illuminated by flashing red warning lights. Her expression not of fear, but of grim vindication. They survived the crash, though barely. Of the 30 soldiers in Kalen's dropship, only 18 walked away. The others remained inside the twisted hull, their bodies broken beyond recognition. Kalen ordered them left where they lay. There was no time for proper rights, not with the perimeter unsecured. The landing zone was a nightmare of wreckage and confusion. Dropships lay scattered across a vast clearing in what appeared to be a dense jungle, many still burning. Communications were sporadic at best, their signals disrupted by the same magnetic anomalies that had brought them down. "Status report," Kalen demanded, surveying the chaos around them. Lieutenant Merrick, his face streaked with blood from a gash on his forehead, consulted his tactical display. "We've made contact with 3 other units, sir. Major Dovin's among them. Casualties are significant. And command, no contact with the Indomitable or any other orbital vessel." Rhea approached, returning from a scouting circuit of the immediate area. "We've got problems, Captain. This isn't a clearing, it's a killing field." "Explain," Kalen said, though something in her tone already had him reaching for his weapon. "The vegetation around us, it's pulling back, retreating, like it's making room for something." Kalen looked around with new eyes. The jungle surrounding them did indeed seem to be slowly receding, the space between the crash sites and the tree line gradually widening. "Some kind of defense mechanism. Or a trap," Rhea said quietly. Before Kalen could respond, a scream cut through the air, a sound of such pure agony that it froze the blood in his veins. He turned to see a soldier at the edge of the clearing, his body convulsing as sinewy vines erupted from the ground, wrapping around his legs with lightning speed. The vines were covered in gleaming barbs that punctured his armor with ease, injecting something that made his body spasm wildly. "Open fire," Kalen shouted, raising his energy rifle. The weapon hummed to life, releasing a beam of concentrated energy that severed several vines. But for each one cut, 3 more emerged, dragging the screaming soldier into the underbrush. More screams erupted across the clearing as the jungle came alive. Vines and tendrils burst from the soil, grabbing at anything within reach. Soldiers fired wildly, their energy weapons carving burning swaths through the attacking vegetation, filling the air with the acrid smell of charred plant matter. "Fall back to the center," Kalen ordered. "Defensive formation." His surviving soldiers rallied, forming a tight circle with their backs to each other. The vines seemed to hesitate at the display of organized resistance, writhing at the edge of their weapons' range. "What the hell are these things?" Lieutenant Merrick gasped, his rifle never ceasing its sweep of the perimeter. "Not what I'm worried about," Rhea replied, her attention focused skyward. "Look!" From the jungle canopy, massive flowers were unfurling, their petals iridescent in the alien sunlight. As they opened, they released clouds of glittering spores that drifted toward the embattled soldiers. "Masks!" Rhea shouted, already pulling her environmental filter into place. "Don't breathe that in." Kalen sealed his helmet just as the spore cloud reached them. Through his visor, he watched in horror as 2 soldiers who hadn't secured their masks in time inhaled the particles. Their reactions were immediate and horrifying. They began to laugh uncontrollably, dropping their weapons and wandering toward the waiting vines. "Stop them," Kalen ordered, but it was too late. The entranced soldiers were beyond hearing, and within moments, the vines had them. We need to move, Rhea said urgently. This position is compromised. Kayla nodded, making a rapid assessment. There's higher ground to the northwest. If we can reach it, we might be able to re-establish communications. If there's anyone left to communicate with, Merrick muttered. The retreat through the jungle was a desperate, fighting withdrawal. The forest of Xylos revealed itself as not merely hostile, but actively predatory. Every plant, from the towering trees to the smallest ground cover, seemed designed to kill. Thorns shot from trunks when approached too closely, releasing neurotoxins that caused immediate paralysis. Pools of what appeared to be water turned out to be digestive enzymes, dissolving organic matter on contact. Worse were the fungi that began to grow on there. Equipment. Spores settled on metal surfaces and within hours had developed into complex structures that secreted acids capable of eating through even their advanced alloys. Our armor is being compromised, Merrick reported, scraping a patch of pulsating orange growth from his shoulder guard. Environmental seals failing. Keep moving, Kalen ordered. We clean and repair when we reach the highlands. Their ranks continued to thin. Private Yaris stepped on what appeared to be solid ground, only to have it collapse beneath him, revealing a pit filled with barbed roots that pulled him under before anyone could react. Corporal Tenna's helmet seal failed, exposing her to a cloud of microscopic spores that caused her to convulse and bleed from every orifice. By the time they reached the base of the Highland Ridge, Kalen's unit of 18 had been reduced to 11. The other units they had contacted earlier were no longer responding. We'll make camp here, Kalen decided, indicating a rocky outcropping that seemed relatively free of vegetation. 2 hour rest, then we continue upward. As they established a perimeter, Rhea approached him, her face grim behind her partially fogged visor. Captain, we need to reconsider our objectives. Our orders are clear, Kalen replied, though with less conviction than he might have had hours earlier. Secure a forward operating base and await reinforcements. Sir, with respect, I don't think reinforcements are coming. The atmospheric interference is growing stronger, not weaker. And she hesitated. I don't think this is random. Kalen looked at her sharply. Explain. The attacks are too coordinated. The plans work together in ways that suggest more than evolutionary adaptation. It's almost as if they're being directed, Kalen finished, the impossible thought finally taking shape in his mind. Rhea nodded. I've been collecting data since we landed. She transferred a file to his tactical display. Look at the attack patterns, the timing, the way different species coordinate. This isn't the behavior of individual organisms. It's a system. Kalen reviewed the data, his training warring with what his eyes told him. The Empire had encountered countless hostile worlds, but never anything like this. Never a biosphere that functioned like a single organism with apparent intent. His contemplation was interrupted by a sound that chilled his blood, a high-pitched, keening wail that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Sky screamers, Rhea shouted, just as dark shapes descended from above. They resembled enormous bats, with leathery wings spanning at least 3 meters and elongated skulls housing rows of needle-like teeth. But it was their cry that made them truly terrible, a sound that bypassed the ears and seemed to resonate directly in the brain, causing momentary paralysis in anyone who heard it. Cover your ears, Kalen ordered, though he knew their helmets offered little protection against the creature's peculiar attack. The sky screamer's dove, their cries intensifying. Kalen felt his muscles lock up, his mind clouding as the sound penetrated his consciousness. Around him, his soldiers were similarly affected, some dropping to their knees, others frozen in place. Rhea alone seemed to maintain some mobility, having modified her helmet with additional dampening technology. She fired upward, her energy rifle cutting through one of the creatures with surgical precision. It fell, its cry transforming into a gurgle as its body crashed into the underbrush. The others scattered, circling higher before regrouping. Kalen fought through the mental fog, forcing his finger to depress the trigger of his own weapon. The beam went wide, but it was enough to further discourage the creatures, who retreated with a final, piercing shriek. They'll be back, Rhea said, scanning the sky. And they won't be alone. She was right. Within minutes, they heard movement in the jungle below, a heavy, deliberate sound unlike anything they'd encountered so far. Form up, Kalen ordered, his soldiers taking defensive positions around the outcropping. From the dense vegetation emerged what Rhea would later dub shadow stalkers, six-legged reptilian creatures the size of small transport vehicles, their scales shifting color to match their surroundings. Only their movement betrayed their presence. That and the gleaming black eyes that reflected no light. Hold fire until they commit, Kalen commanded, knowing that premature attacks would only waste energy and reveal their positions. The shadow stalkers circled the outcropping, their movements unervingly coordinated. One would advance, drawing attention, while another would edge closer from a different angle. It was hunting behavior, but executed with an almost tactical precision. They're too smart, Merrick whispered. These aren't just animals. Kalen was beginning to fear the same thing. Every aspect of Xylos seemed designed not merely to kill, but to outthink its prey. The attack, when it came, was devastating in its coordination. 3 shadow stalkers lunged simultaneously from different directions, while a fourth scaled the back of the outcropping unnoticed. The first creature to reach them was met with concentrated fire, its body rupturing under the assault, spraying caustic blood that ate through armor on contact. The second and third pushed through the defensive line, using their massive bulk to scatter the soldiers. Claws ripped through reinforced plating, jaws crushed limbs and torsos. Private Ellis died first, his upper body separated from his lower by a single bite. Corporal Veit was next, dragged screaming into the jungle by one of the creatures. Lieutenant Merrick managed to kill his attacker, driving an energy blade through its skull, only to be ambushed by the fourth creature as it dropped from above. Kalen found himself back-to-back with Rhea, the two of them firing continuously as they retreated up the ridge. "We can't stay here," he shouted over the din of battle and dying. "We need to reach the summit." Rhea nodded, her face a mask of grim determination. "Go. I'll cover you." "That's not happening, Sergeant," Kalen replied. "We moved together." For a moment, something like respect flickered in Rhea's eyes. Then she was all business again. "On my mark, then. 3, 2, 1, mark." They broke into a sprint, firing blindly behind them as they scrambled up the increasingly steep terrain. The sounds of combat faded, replaced by the pounding of their hearts and the rasp of labored breathing. When they finally stopped, they were alone. "Status check," Kalen gasped, leaning against a rocky formation as he fought to catch his breath. Rhea consulted her tactical display. "No signals, sir. We're the only ones left." The reality crashed down on Kalen with the weight of a collapsing star. His entire unit wiped out in less than a day. The invasion force scattered and decimated. The mission, an unmitigated disaster. "What about the other landings?" he asked, grasping at the hope that somewhere on this hellish planet, the Empire's forces were faring better. Rhea shook her head. "Still no communications. The interference is actually getting worse the higher we climb." Night fell on Xylos, revealing new horrors. The jungle below began to glow with bioluminescence, beautiful, if not for the knowledge that every light represented something evolved to kill. From their vantage point on the ridge, Kalen and Rhea watched as distant energy weapons fire illuminated patches of darkness, indicating that at least some Imperial forces were still fighting. But those lights grew fewer as the hours passed. "We need a plan," Kalen said at last, his voice hollow. Rhea nodded, her expression unreadable in the eerie light. "I've been thinking about that, sir. If we can reach the summit, we might be able to boost our signal enough to contact the Indomitable. And if we can't, then we search for a functioning dropship. Most crashed, but some may have made control landings. If we can find one." She didn't need to finish. It was a desperate plan, but it was all they had. They set out at first light, climbing steadily higher. The vegetation thinned as they ascended, giving way to rocky terrain scattered with strange, crystalline formations that hummed with energy. Some kind of natural conductor, Rhea theorized, scanning one of the structures. It might explain the magnetic disturbances. Kalen was about to respond when the ground beneath his feet shifted. He jumped back just as a massive form erupted from the earth. A burrowing terror, a creature like an enormous earthworm with a circular maw lined with razor-sharp teeth. It lunged at Kalen, who dove aside, the creature's jaws snapping shut on empty air. Rhea opened fire, her energy beam cutting a burning line along the creature's length. It thrashed in pain, its body writhing as it retreated back into the hole from which it had emerged. "That was too close," Kalen muttered, climbing to his feet. "Captain," Rhea said, her voice suddenly urgent. "Look there." She was pointing to a depression in the ground some 50 meters away, partially hidden by crystalline growths. Within it lay the crumpled form of a dropship. Not one of theirs, but an earlier model, its hull overgrown with the same fungi that had attacked their equipment. "It's old," Kalen observed as they approached cautiously. "Pre-invasion. One of the unmanned probes." Rhea shook her head. "No. Look at the configuration. It's designed for personnel. This was a manned mission." Kalen felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. "That's impossible. Xylos was only discovered 6 months ago." According to the official briefing, Rhea reminded him. She approached the vessel, activating her scanner. "This ship has been here for at least 2 years, based on the decay patterns." Kalen's mind raced. If there had been earlier manned missions to Xylos, why had that information been withheld? And why send a full invasion force if those earlier missions had clearly ended in disaster? The dropship's hatch was partially open, inviting investigation. Inside, they found the remains of a scientific team. 5 bodies in the advanced stages of decomposition, their features unrecognizable, but their uniforms still bearing the insignia of Imperial Scientific Corps. They were researchers, Kalen said, examining a workstation that had somehow survived both the crash and the subsequent decay. "Look at this equipment: geological survey, biological sampling." They were studying the planet. Rhea was examining a data storage unit, miraculously preserved in a sealed compartment. "Let's see what they found." She connected her tactical system to the unit, bypassing security with practiced ease. Files populated her display: reports, analyses, warnings. "Oh my God," she whispered, scanning the information. They knew exactly what this place was. Kalen moved to look over her shoulder. The reports described Xylos not as a planet, but as an entity, a self-regulating system with some form of distributed intelligence. The researchers had documented the coordinated defense mechanisms, the apparent communication between different species, the way the entire ecosystem responded to threats with almost military precision. Most disturbing were the final entries, documenting the gradual realization that the planet was not merely reactive but proactive. It learned from encounters, adapted its strategies, and developed new countermeasures with frightening speed. "The High Command had all this information," Kalen said, his voice hollow with disbelief. "They knew what we were walking into." Rhea's expression hardened. "They knew, and they sent us anyway. Because of the Krellium. Because some resources are worth any cost, even if that cost is thousands of lives." The betrayal cut deep. Kalen had built his life around service to the Empire, around belief in its mission of bringing order and civilization to the galaxy. To discover that those he served could sacrifice soldiers so callously, could hide such crucial information. "We need to warn the others," he said at last. "Anyone still alive needs to know what they're facing." They salvaged what they could from the research vessel: additional power cells, emergency rations, and most importantly, the data storage unit with its damning evidence. Then they continued their ascent, driven now not just by the need to survive, but by the need for truth. The summit was closer than they had realized, obscured by the strange atmospheric conditions of Xylos. As they climbed higher, the crystalline formations grew more numerous and more complex, forming intricate patterns that seemed almost deliberate. "It's like a circuit," Rhea observed, "or a nervous system." The thought was unsettling, but it aligned with what they had learned. that Xylos might be more than just a planet with hostile life forms. It might be, in some incomprehensible way, alive itself. They were within sight of the summit when the attack came, not from below or above, but from all around, as the crystalline structures suddenly pulsed with blinding light. The air filled with a high-frequency sound that drove them to their knees, their helmets providing little protection. Through watering eyes, Kalen saw movement at the periphery of his vision, shadow stalkers, emerging from hidden crevices in the mountainside. They had been waiting perhaps all along. "Run!" he shouted to Rhea, drawing his sidearm as his rifle had been lost in their earlier escape. "Get to the summit." Rhea hesitated only for a moment before sprinting upward. Kalen fired at the nearest shadow stalker, his shots finding their mark, but seeming to cause only minimal damage. These creatures were different from those they had encountered before. Larger, with thicker scales and a certain deliberateness in their movements that spoke of greater intelligence. A massive form slammed into Kalen from behind, sending him sprawling. He rolled, narrowly avoiding snapping jaws, and fired directly into the creature's eye. It recoiled, black ichor spraying from the wound, but didn't retreat. More closing in. Kalen knew he couldn't outrun them, not with Rhea already ahead. Someone had to hold him back. "Geo!" he shouted, though he wasn't sure she could still hear him. "Get the truth out." He continued firing, dropping two more of the creatures before his weapon overheated. As he frantically tried to cool it, a shadow stalker seized the opportunity, launching itself at him with terrifying speed. The impact never came. Instead, a blinding beam of energy cut through the creature mid-leap, splitting it nearly in two. Rhea stood a few meters away, her rifle humming with power. "Like hell I'm leaving you behind," she growled, helping him to his feet. Together, they fought their way upward, firing continuously to keep the relentless predators at bay. Their weapons began to fail as power cells depleted, forcing them to rely on vibroblades for the final stretch. When they finally reached the summit, both were bleeding from multiple wounds, their armor in tatters. But the view that greeted them made their suffering momentarily irrelevant. The summit was a vast, circular plateau, its surface covered not with stone, but with an intricate network of crystalline structures that pulsed with internal light. At the center stood a formation unlike any other, a towering spire that seemed to reach for the stars themselves. "It's beautiful," Kalen whispered despite everything. Rhea was already moving toward the spire, her scanner active. "The energy readings are off the scale. If we can tap into this, we might be able to boost our signal enough to reach orbit." They worked quickly, aware that the shadow stalkers were regrouping below. Rhea connected her communications system to one of the smaller crystalline nodes, using technology repurposed from the research vessel. "It's working," she said, her voice tight with concentration. "I'm getting a carrier wave. Wait, something's happening." The crystalline network around them began to pulse more rapidly, the light intensifying until it was almost blinding. The spire at the center seemed to hum with power, its tip glowing with a blue-white radiance that hurt to look at directly. "Is it responding to us?" Kalen asked, moving closer despite his instinctive caution. Rhea shook her head, her expression a mixture of awe and fear. "Not to us. To our signal. It's amplifying it, but also changing it somehow." Before Kalen could respond, a shadow stalker crested the edge of the plateau, followed by another and another. They were surrounded, cut off from any escape. "Get behind me," Kalen ordered, drawing his vibroblade. It was a futile gesture. They were outnumbered and outmatched, their energy weapons nearly depleted. But he would not die without a fight. Rhea, however, wasn't looking at the approaching predators. Her attention remained fixed on the central spire, which was now pulsating with an almost hypnotic rhythm. "Captain," she said, her voice distant, "I think you should see this." Kalen glanced back and felt his breath catch. The spire was changing, its crystalline surface flowing like liquid, reshaping itself into a form that was somehow familiar. "It's responding to your thoughts," Rhea whispered. "Your memories, your fears, your humanity." The shadow stalkers had stopped their advance, forming a ring around the humans but making no move to attack. Their black eyes reflected the pulsing light of the crystals, giving them an almost reverent appearance. The spire completed its transformation, now resembling a roughly humanoid shape composed of interlocking crystal facets. It had no features, no true limbs, but its stance conveyed an unmistakable sense of attention. It was focused on them. And then, without warning, Kalen's mind was no longer his own. Images flooded his consciousness, vast networks of roots and fungal structures spreading beneath the surface of Xylos, carrying signals faster than any electronic system. Creatures evolving not randomly, but with purpose, guided by an intelligence that operated on a timescale almost incomprehensible to humans. And at the center of it all, a presence, ancient, aware, and utterly alien. He saw other visitors to Xylos, not just the research team they had discovered, but earlier expeditions, some bearing the insignia of the Empire, others from civilizations he didn't recognize. All had met the same fate: assessment, resistance, and, ultimately, elimination. But the presence wasn't merely defensive. It was curious. It had studied each intruder, incorporated their knowledge, their technology, their very biology into its own understanding. It learned from those it destroyed, becoming ever more sophisticated in its responses. And now it was learning from Kalen, reading his thoughts, his memories, his understanding of the Empire and its intentions. He could feel it sifting through his mind with clinical detachment, analyzing the threat that the Athelian Empire represented. Just as suddenly as it had begun, the mental contact ceased. Kalen found himself on his knees, Rhea beside him in a similar state of collapse. The crystalline humanoid had returned to its spire form, though it continued to pulse with the same rhythmic light. "Did you?" Kalen began, unable to articulate the experience. Rhea nodded, her face pale. "It showed me everything. What Xylos is, what wants. And what is that? To be left alone," she said simply. "It doesn't hate us, doesn't even understand the concept. We're just an infection to be eliminated, a threat to its balance." The shadow stalkers still surrounded them, motionless, waiting. The standoff might have continued indefinitely, if not for Rhea's sudden gasp of pain. She clutched at her side, where a previously minor wound had begun to bleed profusely. "Something's wrong," she said, her voice weakening. "The spores. I think they're in my bloodstream." Kalen moved to support her as she swayed. "We need to get you medical attention." "Too late for that," she said with grim certainty. She pressed something into his hand, a small data storage device. "Take this. It's everything. The research team's findings, my own observations, and now, what we just experienced. The truth about Xylos. We're both getting out of here," Kalen insisted, though he knew it for the lie it was. Rhea shook her head, a sad smile on her lips. "No, Captain, but you are. I think it's curious about you, about your reaction to the truth. It wants to see what you'll do with it." As if in confirmation, the shadow stalkers suddenly parted, creating a clear path to the mountain trail they had ascended. "Go," Rhea urged, her voice fading. "Tell them what this place really is. Make my death mean something." Kalen wanted to refuse, to stay with her until the end. But the mission had changed. No longer was it about conquest or resource extraction. Now, it was about truth, about preventing more senseless deaths. "I'll make sure they know," he promised. "Your name, your courage, the truth you discovered. None of it will be forgotten." Rhea nodded once, then pushed him away with the last of her strength. "Go now, before it changes its mind." Kalen ran, the data device clutched tightly in his hand. Behind him, he heard Rhea's final cry, not of pain, but of defiance, a last act of human will against the incomprehensible force that was Xylos. The descent was surreal. The creatures that had hunted them so relentlessly now stood aside, watching with those same black, reflective eyes. The plants that had attacked with poisoned thorns and constricting vines remained still as Kalen passed. It was as if the entire ecosystem had received instructions to let this one human go, this messenger, this witness. In a valley far from his original landing site, Kalen found what he was looking for, a damaged but potentially functional emergency shuttle, ejected from one of the larger transport ships during the chaotic descent. Its systems were compromised, its hull pitted with acid burns from the fungal attacks, but its core was intact. Kalen worked feverishly, applying everything he knew about Imperial spacecraft to coax the vessel back to life. It took days, during which he subsisted on emergency rations from the shuttle supplies, always expecting the apparent truce to end, for Xylos to change its mind and eliminate the last human witness. But the attack never came. And on the seventh day, as the shuttle's engines reluctantly fired, lifting the craft from the surface of Xylos, Kalen understood that his survival was deliberate, a message in itself. The journey back to Imperial space was a nightmare of isolation and trauma. The shuttle's life support systems functioned only intermittently, forcing Kalen to spend much of the journey in suspended animation to conserve oxygen. During his brief periods of consciousness, he reviewed the data that Rhea had given him, adding his own observations and conclusions. By the time the shuttle limped into range of an outlying Imperial outpost, Kalen had come to terms with what he had to do. The Empire would not want this truth known. It would contradict their narrative of invincibility, expose their willingness to sacrifice soldiers for resources, and reveal the existence of a power beyond their control or understanding. But the truth had to be told. For Rhea, for all those who had died on Xylos, for those who might be sent to die there in the future if nothing changed. The reception at Outpost Vega 9 was not what he had expected. Rather than being greeted as a returning hero, the sole survivor of a disastrous mission, Kalen was immediately quarantined and subjected to extensive medical examinations and psychological evaluations. His debriefings were conducted by senior intelligence officers rather than military command. They questioned him relentlessly about his experiences, but their interest seemed focused on the capabilities of Xylos' defenses rather than the loss of life or the prior knowledge that had been withheld. When Kalen mentioned the research team and the data he had recovered, the atmosphere in the room changed perceptibly. "We'll need that data, of course," the lead interrogator said, his tone carefully neutral. "For analysis." "I've already analyzed it," Kalen replied. "It proves that the Empire knew about the dangers of Xylos before sending us in, that we were sacrificed for Krellium." The interrogator's expression didn't change. "Captain Vance, you've been through a traumatic experience. It's natural to seek explanations, to assign blame. But I assure you, the Empire would never knowingly endanger its soldiers, without proper cause and preparation." "Then how do you explain the research vessel, the team that was sent 2 years ago?" "There is no record of any such mission," the interrogator said smoothly. "And given your admitted exposure to hallucinogenic spores and the psychological trauma you've endured, your recollections cannot be considered reliable. It was happening just as Rhea had predicted. They were going to bury the truth, discredit him, possibly even silence him permanently." The data device suddenly felt very heavy in Kalen's hidden pocket. Over the next weeks, Kalen was kept in isolation, ostensibly for continued medical observation. His condition was listed as stable but concerning, with official reports citing possible neurological contamination and stress-induced delusions. Visitors were prohibited. Access to communication systems was denied. He was a prisoner in all but name. But they had underestimated him, or perhaps overestimated their own security. During one of his medical examinations, Kalen managed to access a terminal, using the credentials of a careless technician who had failed to log out properly. He couldn't send the data directly. All outgoing communications were too heavily monitored, but he could do the next best thing. He entered a series of queries into the Imperial Information Network, searching for names from his past, people he trusted, people who might listen to the truth about Xylos. And he found one, Dr. Eliana Voss, a former mentor from his academy days, now serving as an advisor to a moderate faction within the Imperial Senate. Kalen composed a message, brief and cryptic, designed to pique her curiosity without alerting the monitors. Then he created a delayed transmission protocol that would activate during the station's next scheduled maintenance cycle, when security systems would be temporarily diminished. The next day, he was informed that he was being transferred to a specialized care facility for further treatment. The real meaning was clear. They were moving him somewhere more secure, somewhere he could be controlled or, if necessary, eliminated. But as the transport ship prepared for departure, alarms suddenly blared throughout the station. Emergency protocols activated, security personnel scrambled, and in the confusion, Kalen made his move. He had prepared for this moment, studying the station's layout, identifying weaknesses in their security procedures. With the skills honed through years of Imperial training, he escaped his guards, reached a communication hub, and transmitted the full data package to Dr. Voss before security protocols could stop him. They caught him, of course. One man against an entire Imperial outpost. The outcome was never in doubt. But as they dragged him away, Kalen smiled. The truth was out now, beyond their reach. Whether it would make a difference remained to be seen, but he had fulfilled his promise to Rhea. Years passed. Kalen Vance became a non-person, his name erased from Imperial records, his service forgotten. The official account of the Xylos expedition described a tragic accident, a sudden atmospheric storm that destroyed the fleet before landing operations could commence. No mention was made of ground combat, of hostile flora and fauna, of a planet that thought and defended itself. Confined to a rehabilitation center on a remote world, Kalen watched the stars through a reinforced window and wondered if his sacrifice had meant anything. Had Dr. Voss received his message? Had she understood its importance? Had she been brave enough to act on it? Then one day, a new attendant brought him his meal, an older woman he hadn't seen before. As she set down the tray, she leaned close and whispered, "The truth is spreading. Slowly, carefully, but spreading. You're not forgotten, Captain. Neither is Sergeant Rhea." Before he could respond, she was gone, never to return. But her words gave him hope. Hope that perhaps, somewhere in the vast Athelian Empire, people were beginning to question, to doubt, to seek truth rather than comfortable lies. And on distant Xylos, unchanged and unchanging, the crystalline spire continued its silent vigil, waiting for the next invasion, the next opportunity to defend and to learn. It had allowed one human to escape, to carry its message, a warning, not a threat. Whether that warning would be heeded remained to be seen. But Xylos could wait. It had all the time in the universe.